Hello there folks, welcome back to another video on the channel. Today, you've seen the title, we are talking about England's starting 11 for their opening group game of Euro 2020. 21? Nobody really knows. UEFA have said it's 2020, by which they mean 2021. But they couldn't change the branding, you know, because UEFA, they're short on cash, aren't they? No, they're not. You added more teams in, your own selves to blame. Coming up on the channel, I will be giving you my full rundown of what I think the Euros will look like as a complete competition. Fans of Austria, look away now. Austria will be fine, probably, maybe. That'll be coming up in a few days. But let's crack on then. Let's talk you through my team for the Euros, my starting 11. And this is a starting 11 that I've ummed and ahed with. This isn't an 11 that I was settled on. I thought I was. I thought this is the team I would play. And I should say, I'm recording this before England's second friendly, warm-up friendly. So if there's any injuries in there, obviously change it. And I'll tell you what I would do in those situations, sort of give the backups, essentially. So, starting with goalkeeper then. And this is probably one of the most straightforward of all of them. Nick Pope being out, he was obviously a contender for it. Some people not a fan of Nick Pope, think he's a little bit erratic, but I don't know. It would have been tougher between him and Jordan Pickford than I think it would either be for Henderson or for Sam Johnson, who I'm pleased went in over Ramsdale. I actually think Johnson's had a pretty good season and a difficult season as well at West Brom. The problem we've got with Pickford is that a lot of England fans don't really rate him. The person that rates him more than anybody, Gareth Southgate. And I think Jordan Pickford plays better for Gareth Southgate. I think that's important. I think the relationship between player and especially goalkeeper, right? Having the confidence in your goalkeeper is so crucial, whether you're a defender, and again, even a manager, right? You have to know that you can rely on that guy. And I think that's how Southgate feels about Pickford. Despite some of his indifferent form for Everton, I would say, and Everton fans have been somewhat critical of him this season, I think he's still the go-to guy. I don't think there's anybody obvious. It still feels weird to me that Joe Hart hasn't just become England goalkeeper for a decade, and his drop-off is like, if you'd have said to me who would have been the goalkeeper for this tournament 6 or 7 years ago, it seemed obvious it was Joe Hart. There was no other option, and of course now his sort of decline has opened it up for people like Jordan Pickford that would have been coming through. I think Dean Henderson's an interesting conversation to be had there, because I think he's still not nailed down that position at Manchester United. I think after this next season, coming forward towards a World Cup year, then we will start to realise if Dean Henderson is the guy or not. And if he's not, then I think Jordan Pickford probably holds on to this for some time. But he would be my starting goalkeeper. Right, the back line. And this is where things get a little bit more difficult. I'll give you the whole back line, and then we'll talk through each one. So Reece James at right back. We've got John Stones, Harry Maguire, and Luke Shaw. Now, of course, there's a fitness concern over Harry Maguire. Will he, won't he start? But that is the back line I would play for the opening game against Croatia. And I think the talking points, I don't think the back two is a talking point. I think John Stones and Harry Maguire are settled in there. If Maguire were to be injured, I think the next option is probably Tyrone Mings. The option you could do is you could play Walker and Stones next to one another. You could move Stones to left back. You could play Walker next to him. They play like right back, centre back together at Manchester City. There's that combination there, and I think combinations is a theme throughout this squad that I've picked, or the team that I've picked, and that could be one of them, right? Having Kyle Walker next to John Stones. I don't have him starting, and we'll go to right back then. I think the right back conversation is really interesting. I've watched the first warm-up game. Trent Alexander-Arnold went off injured in that game. Devastating for him. I actually predicted that could happen in my squad video. I said it would be so unlucky and so obvious that he would get injured and the conversation would have to turn away from him. I am so impressed with Reece James. I think there are good arguments for Trippier, really good arguments for him, right? Especially if you're playing a 3 at the back and then you're playing wing backs. I think he's arguably the best fit for that particular role. But in a 4, which is what I would play, and again, whether Gareth does or not, I don't know if he's watching the videos. Gareth, hope you're liking and subscribing. I think he is probably best in that system. I think Trent is not far behind him in that kind of system. I think you give a little bit more freedom to Trent, but it's a back 4, right? Looking to be strong, steady, and to be consistent over the course of 90 minutes. Reece James is the guy for me. Like, and I'm a Liverpool fan. I can't pretend that I don't absolutely love Trent Alexander-Arnold. I do. But in high pressure situations, there are points, and even as a Liverpool fan, we have to kind of admit this, there are points where Trent lets himself down a little bit, and especially if he's carrying a bit of an injury. Would that have played into my thought process or not? I don't think it would have done. Again, I'm so impressed with Reece James. Just defensively, I think he makes people feel calmer around him. I think that, again, there's something to be said for players that make other players play better. And I think Reece James is a bit of an enabler, even from right back. Chelsea fans adore him. I think his delivery is better than people ever thought it was. To be honest, I think that's been a surprise for Reece James this season. And defensively, there's not many questions to ask. You look at the Champions League games he's played recently, especially that final, when he came up against Raheem Sterling, who we'll get onto later. he just shut the door. The amount of times he won the ball back, the amount of duels he wins, the amount of times he puts himself in position to win those duels. Reece James to me is an obvious candidate to start at right back, and yeah, it'd be my choice. Over on the other side, I don't really care, and that's such a weird thing to say. Post Ashley Cole, there was a lot of conversation over left back of who would be the next guy. Right, Leighton Baines was in the conversation for a little while. Ryan Bertrand was there, and now I think personally with Luke Shaw and with Ben Chilwell, I don't mind who starts out of the two of them. It's probably our strongest area, or our most consistent area in terms of quality. I think both players offer you very similar things, and I think what edges it for Luke Shaw is he's played an entire season next to Harry Maguire, and they seem to have a nice rapport. I think Shaw's come on a lot in the last couple of years, ever since Jose Mourinho had a go at him unfairly. And I'm a big fan of Shaw too. I think what he offers, if you'd asked me a few months ago, I'd have probably leaned towards Chilwell, but I think Shaw has just continued to be the player that many people expected. Interestingly, with Chilwell, I don't think he got enough credit for how good his performance was during that Champions League final. And again, if Chilwell started, I wouldn't really mind. I could have easily put Chilwell in at left back in this team. But we're going with Luke Shaw again, simply for that rapport with Harry Maguire. If Harry Maguire isn't there, I wonder if that'll play into the thinking with someone like Ben Chilwell, who adapted to a Chelsea team pretty quickly, in essence, really. So you could maybe see that characteristic coming into an England side, which is having to change its backline around quite late or quite last minute. So yeah, there's my back four. Reece James, John Stones, Harry Maguire, and Luke Shaw. Now, moving forward, this is where things get a little bit more complex, because there's a player here that is not necessarily fit for this tournament, but I talk about Reece James being an enabler, right? Making other players better around him, and there's no man that says that more to me than Jordan Henderson. I'd stick him alongside Jude Bellingham, who I think is he's the real deal. Having seen him, and I've not watched a load of Bundesliga this year. I can't pretend I have, right? In the same way that I've not watched loads of Kieran Trippier this season, I can't pretend that I have. So if you think Kieran Trippier should be in, hopefully you've seen far more of him than me, and your opinion is based upon that, right? With Jude Bellingham, I've watched an awful lot of him in the Champions League this year, and my goodness me, for a player so young, you can see why Birmingham City retired a shirt. He has got all the tools, and for someone so young, the physicality that he brings, right? He looks like an athlete. He's the classic sort of 2021 player of this athletic player that is not just athletic, though. He's got so much more to his game. He's crafty. He's clever. He's a leader. And I think having a player like that next to someone like Jordan Henderson, you're looking at the vice captain and the future captain, in my opinion. I would fully expect Jude Bellingham in a number of seasons to be the captain of England. And this is the tournament where you give him that chance. Declan Rice isn't in this duo, right? And Mason Mount isn't in this duo. And much like my situation at left back, if we started with Declan Rice and Mason Mount, I'd be fine with it. I think the combination of those two, I think their off-field relationship helps on the pitch. I think about when I used to play, those players I got on with and I knew stylistically, they would always improve my game. I would know what I was expecting. And whether they have that from playing with each other or just being such good friends, it would be really interesting to me to see how that dynamic would work in an England shirt. And I kind of really want to see that at some point. It could be, again, what Gareth goes with. Mason Mount has had a phenomenal season. The fact that he doesn't start in this team is the one question mark for me. Do you start with someone like Mount, who's a little bit older, who's got a little bit more experience, he's played at under 21 competitions and things like this? Or do you stick him in there alongside a Jordan Henderson? Do you gamble Henderson's fitness, right? He didn't start that first game of the warm-ups. He has to start the second one. Again, you'll know by now if he has or not. He has to prove his fitness. Now, from what I've heard and seen, he's not that far away. So there could be a world in which we see Henderson start that first game, because I think what he brings in terms of influence and making players around him better is so valuable, especially when England need a leadership back there. I think you've got some leaders in the team already, right? I think Reece James could potentially be in that category. John Stones appears to be very vocal. Of course, Harry Maguire is in that category. Jordan Pickford strikes me as someone that is not afraid to say what he thinks. And I think you're building almost a team of leaders when you're starting, especially in central areas, right? I think that's been one of England's problems. They've had a lot of quality players, but they've not had a lot of players prepared to take accountability, and that's something that really impresses me about Bellingham. Technically, I think him and Henderson could work really well. I think you could see Jordan Henderson stop and let Bellingham sort of play in those open spaces that I think the front three and Harry Kane, spoiler, will open up. But yeah, it's interesting because I think you could also play it as a one with two in front. I wouldn't be opposed to seeing a Declan Rice sitting there, having Henderson, Mount, having Bellingham, Mount, having Bellingham and Henderson as players just in front. I think the midfield options that he has, right? You think about Calvin Phillips is there as well. I thought James Ward-Prowse would be included, but again, I think stylistically he fits in, and maybe even Jesse Lingard, right? We don't know the severity of Trent's injury as I record this. He could be out of the England team by this point. They could have brought in a replacement, which would be devastating for him. There was talk that even he would play centrally. I don't like the idea of playing Trent there. He's one of the world's best right backs. No matter what you think of him, he is one of the world's best right backs. You don't want to move him out of there. It doesn't make sense to me at all. And again, I don't think it makes that much sense playing him in like a 5 and he's the right wing back. I think Trippier is the guy for that particular role. It's going to be curious to see how Southgate blends those players together, especially when you've got the likes of Grealish and Foden in front of him, right? Maybe there's lots of conversations to be had there. And let's move forward. Let's go to that front three, because that sort of epitomises why I've got the players behind. So far, we've got a pretty steady team, I think. I think the picks of having Reece James in there and Luke Shaw gives you a lot of stability in wider areas, as well as having Jordan Henderson alongside Bellingham, right? Again, and that will be something I'm sure we debate in the comments. And please do. I want to read them through. I want to talk through some of my ideas and listen to some of your ideas, and inevitably we'll let Gareth make the decision, right? But I'm curious to how you see it, what balance you think is perfect. I don't think Rice Henderson works, by the way. That's one thing I'm keen to avoid. But let's go forward. Let's go to those attacking midfielders. We're playing 3 of them behind Harry Kane. Let's talk through them. So this is vital. They have to get this bit right. This bit is absolutely crucial. I tweeted a few days ago now that Harry Kane, to me, he's not a number 10. Now, when I tweeted that out, a lot of Spurs fans went, look at this, show me his award, right, where he's got the most goals, most assists of the league season. And rightly so. I totally understand that as the new version of a number 10, Harry Kane can play that deep lying forward role. To me, a number 10 though, and this is where I was coming from with it. That's Coutinho, that's Ronaldinho, that's even maybe Boy Firmino at times, but that's Zidane, right? These players that were traditionally playing just behind a set of strikers or playing behind a striker and allowing that number 9 then more space to operate in and giving him that one job of finishing things off. For me, Harry Kane has had a season at Tottenham where we have to remember, I promise we're talking about the 3 behind him here. You have to remember that with Harry Kane, you've got a player that is prepared to play that number 10 role, the new sort of number 10 role. To me, it's more of a false 9, but he plays the false 9 role as well as the attacking 9 role. And I'm not sure Harry Kane should be asked to do that job when he's got these 3 players behind him. So these 3 players are Raheem Sterling, who is the question mark here really, ahead of Jack Grealish, if anything. Phil Foden, who I think, especially second half of the season, has been absolutely tremendous. And Jadon Sancho, who is continually, seemingly one of the most underrated players in an England shirt. Needs to put in a few more good performances for me. I think there's been a few England performances where he's been underwhelming. And for a player we don't see every week, of course, playing his trade in the Bundesliga, that is probably, in some senses, going against him. And I think that is not necessarily his fault. He comes into an England setup, which is not his normal setup. Of course, he doesn't play quite the same role as he does for Borussia Dortmund, and I think that's something that England managers have got wrong, that they've not been able to transition players from their club sides into their national team. And Jadon Sancho is one of the victims of that almost. But let's talk about Raheem Sterling, okay? Because Raheem Sterling, by all accounts, for my money, has had probably his poorest season in a Manchester City shirt, in a season when they've won the league, right? There's been a lot of criticism from Manchester City fans. He did not perform in the Champions League final. Reece James, ironically enough, completely took him out of it. But one thing Raheem Sterling does have, and go back and watch the qualifiers, go back and watch Raheem Sterling's impact in these games. He has a relationship and an understanding with Harry Kane. And these wingers, him and Sancho and Phil Foden, have to have this for this England setup to work. Gareth Southgate seems certain, especially when you only pick Dominic Calvert-Lewin alongside Harry Kane, to have Harry Kane as his main guy, right? Which I think is fine. I think planning around one of the best strikers in the world alongside the likes of Robert Lewandowski, like that, it makes perfect sense to me to do this. But you have to provide support for Harry Kane. You can't just say, Harry, I want you to drop deep and then I want you to burst into penalty areas constantly. Harry Kane's passing ability is sensational, which means you have to make sure the way that Sancho plays, or the way that Rashford plays if he comes in, or Grealish and Phil Foden are making these incisive runs to be goal scorers for this team. There might be a world come the end of the tournament, because of the new way Harry Kane has adapted the way he plays, despite his finishing ability and his general aura that I think he has now in world football, that if you have Kane, your sole supplier of goals, England will so struggle in this competition. They need Sterling to be in goal-scoring situations. They need Phil Foden to be in them, and they need Jadon Sancho to be in them, and maybe even at times Jude Bellingham, right? If he's been released, or Mason Mount if they're being released forward. These forward players have to all find an energy and it sounds quite mystical when he's like that. So to figure out how to play with Harry Kane. And my question really for you is there enough time for these players to develop that understanding around Harry Kane? Now, England haven't played together that much in recent times, and Son Heung-min doesn't play for England. I've done some research. It's going to happen quickly. There's not a lot of time. There's less time than normal, and they play an awful lot of games in a very short space of time. These are professional players. These are players that are used to having to go to different clubs or having new players sign and adapting to the way that they play very quickly, right? And this England group seem as close-knit as any England group has done for a very long time. It has to happen quickly. It has to be effective, and it can't come at the... my fear is it can't come to the detriment of Harry Kane. You have to build a system around him because of how pivotal he is to all the good things that England do. So hopefully we see that happen. And for me, the best combination in this first game against Croatia is that team, right? You've got the pace of Sterling, you've got the craft of Jadon Sancho, and the wizardry, I'm going to call it, of Phil Foden. I think Phil Foden's ability to pick up spaces, especially to play in the half spaces and create for other players. I worry if you were to play this system, you would have problems with him and Kane. And I wonder if there'd be situations where Southgate would play Harry Kane as a 10, right? And then you move Sterling, say, up front, or you play Rashford up front, or you bring on Calvert-Lewin and you move Foden out wide, because he's done that quite a few times for City. And the way in which he can interact with fullbacks then and drag players around and move people out of position at the prospects of other players moving into those spaces, to me, is really exciting. So team-wise, let's finish it off. Harry Kane, of course. It would be weird now if I went Calvert-Lewin up front. No, Harry Kane goes up front behind Sterling, Sancho, and Phil Foden, behind Bellingham and Henderson, behind Reece James, John Stones, Harry Maguire, and then Luke Shaw with Jordan Pickford in goal. I don't know if it's good enough to win. The squad is strong. There's lots of options for Southgate. Will that be, it's a weird thing to say, right? Will that be to his detriment? Will there be this idea that he can tinker? He's got lots of players that can do different things. And there are, although that's my 11, there are many different combinations that I'd be really excited about. So don't be watching this as a Leeds fan and thinking, oh, this is a disgrace, or a Villa fan going, Jack Grealish has created the most chances this season, right? Just realise that for the game against Croatia, against a very experienced side, I think having some guile, some speed, and getting the best out of Kane, having that relationship between himself and Sterling, is pivotal to how this England team should set up, and hopefully will set up. Gareth, are you watching? Probably not. I'd like to think you're not. I'd like to think you're focusing on your plan, and I'm behind it. I can't wait to see how England do. They should get through the group. We'll talk about that when I predict my my Euros complete bracket. But hopefully you've enjoyed this video. If you have, do drop a like on it. If you want to see some more, make sure you subscribe. Lots of Football Manager content on the channel this month, as well as lots of Euro-based, England-based content too. And I look forward to sharing the journey with you. Hopefully you're looking forward to it. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Obviously, this is not something I do all that often. Many of you won't have heard me talk about football in a little bit more detail before. And believe me, in some videos, we're going to go into far more detail. And in some, we're going to take it slightly less seriously in sort of a more Dr. Benji-esque style. But I'll take some time. We'll figure out some more things. And I look forward to seeing you again. We love with care. If you're going to spend until next time, in a bit. Goodbye.